Michael Dawson had spent the last 12 years at Stratus Tech, a fast-growing tech company based in Silicon Valley. As a senior software engineer, he had seen it all from the early days of the company, operating in a cramped office with a handful of employees to the sprawling tech giant it had become, with thousands of employees and a global footprint. For Michael, it wasn't about the accolades or the spotlight. His work had always been his pride, and he found fulfillment in making sure the company's software solutions were robust, scalable, and reliable. While others around him were clamoring for attention, Michael quietly carried the weight of Stratus Tech's technology on his shoulders. At 45, Michael had built the core of Stratus Tech's product from the ground up. It was his vision and countless hours of work that had helped the company grow from a small startup to a powerhouse in the tech industry. He wasn't flashy or showy, like some of the younger employees, but his work spoke for itself. He knew the software inside and out, every line of code, every system, update every patch. He was the silent architect behind the company's success. The older he got, the more he realized that his contributions, while indispensable, were often overlooked. His colleagues might have called him reserved, but Michael didn't mind. He believed that results mattered more than recognition. Stratus Tech had changed significantly in the past couple of years. The once tight-knit team of innovators had expanded into a corporate machine, driven by the demands of investors and the pressures of rapid growth. Enter Rebecca Adams, the new CEO brought in to guide the company through its next phase. Rebecca was brilliant with a reputation for making tough decisions and steering companies toward efficiency. Her arrival meant restructuring, streamlining operations, and focusing heavily on data-driven decision-making. While many employees saw her as a visionary, Michael couldn't help but feel uneasy. The company had started to lose the spirit of innovation that had once made it a standout. Suddenly it seemed like everything was about numbers, deadlines, and growth metrics, things that Michael wasn't particularly passionate about. Michael had never been one to chase promotions, but even he couldn't ignore the shifts happening around him. As Rebecca began making her changes, Michael found himself more and more on the periphery. He had spent years building the company's infrastructure and ensuring its stability, but now it seemed like the spotlight was shifting to others. People like Ryan Carter, the ambitious young product manager who had quickly become Rebecca's favorite. Ryan, with his polished demeanor and strategic mindset, was everything the company needed to keep pushing forward. His rise to prominence didn't go unnoticed, and Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding every time Ryan walked into the room. Stratus Tech's culture was evolving, but for Michael, it wasn't for the better. The pressure was mounting, and as younger talent began to fill the spaces that were once his, Michael knew that things were about to change. Little did he know his quiet dedication would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. Ryan Carter's arrival at Stratus Tech was met with enthusiasm. At 28, he was the embodiment of youthful ambition, with a polished resume and an undeniable charisma that made him an immediate favorite among the upper echelons of the company. Having recently left a prestigious consulting firm, Ryan was hired as a product manager, someone who could drive new initiatives and lead teams through the next phase of growth. His reputation for solving complex problems and his talent for building strong relationships made him a perfect fit for the fast-paced, high-stakes environment at Stratus Tech. From the moment Ryan stepped through the doors, it was clear that he was someone who knew how to make an impression. He quickly charmed the executive team, especially CEO Rebecca Adams, who saw in him the kind of leader Stratus Tech needed to scale further. Ryan was articulate, confident, and had a natural ability to speak the language of both business and technology, making him the perfect liaison between the engineering teams and the executive suite. His frequent meetings with Rebecca and other senior leaders only cemented his growing influence within the company. Michael watched Ryan's ascent with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. While he appreciated Ryan's intelligence and drive, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was more about the appearance of success than the substance. Where Michael had spent years honing his craft and understanding the intricacies of Stratus Tech's software, Ryan seemed to glide effortlessly into leadership positions, making strategic decisions with ease, but without the depth of experience Michael had. Ryan's style was one of high-level presentations and big-picture ideas, polished and impressive, but Michael knew that without the technical knowledge, it was just smoke and mirrors. In the early days, Ryan didn't directly interfere with Michael's work. He was focused on improving product management, working with the marketing team, and engaging with clients. But soon enough, it became apparent that Ryan had his sights set on more. He began to take a keen interest in the technical side of the business, not just the product, but the systems that supported it. Ryan started asking questions about the company's software infrastructure questions that seemed more like attempts to gain control over something Michael had carefully nurtured for years. At first it wasn't overt, but Michael noticed the subtle shift. Ryan was everywhere attending meetings. Michael had always run, making decisions about projects Michael had been leading, and gradually taking credit for the company's most successful initiatives. Michael found himself in a strange position. On one hand, he admired Ryan's ambition. On the other, he couldn't help but feel threatened. It wasn't so much the competition it was, that Ryan seemed to think he could easily step into a role Michael had spent years building. Ryan's approach was straightforward, and it often worked in his favor. He would present high-level strategies that impressed the management team, but Michael knew the real work, the hard technical work, was being overlooked. It was as if Ryan was able to sell ideas to the higher-ups without fully understanding the details that made those ideas possible. Ryan's increasing visibility in the company didn't just affect Michael's day-to-day work, it changed the culture of Stratus Tech. The once collaborative hands-on approach to problem-solving was being replaced by a more top-down management style. Decisions were being made quickly with little room for debate or input from the engineers who actually understood the technology. Michael, who had always thrived in a more egalitarian environment, found it difficult to adjust. What was once a place of innovation and technical excellence now felt more like a corporate machine moving faster, but losing the heart of what had made it great. As Ryan's role continued to expand, Michael found himself more and more sidelined. Projects that had once been his responsibility were now being handled by Ryan, often without much consultation. The younger man's constant presence at executive meetings, his ability to secure resources for his initiatives, and his apparent rapport with Rebecca only served to further isolate Michael. There were no more late-night brainstorming sessions or in-depth discussions about software development. Instead, Ryan was the one taking the stage, presenting big ideas that would be rolled out without much regard for the underlying challenges. But it wasn't just the shift in power dynamics that bothered Michael. It was the realization that Ryan wasn't just taking control of projects. He was starting to take credit for ideas Michael had been developing in the background. Michael had spent months working on a new software tool that would radically improve the company's operations. And Ryan, without missing a beat, began positioning himself as the mastermind behind it. It wasn't an immediate theft, more like a subtle hijacking of Michael's hard work. Ryan would mention the idea in meetings, claiming it as his own, and soon enough, it was being presented to the board as a game-changing initiative he had conceptualized. At first, Michael tried to let it slide. He wasn't one to stir the pot, especially when it came to office politics. But as Ryan continued to gain momentum and his influence over the company grew, Michael realized that something needed to change. He had put in the time, the effort, and the expertise to build what Stratus Tech had become, and now it felt like he was being erased from the story. For months, Michael Dawson had been meticulously crafting a new software solution, an ambitious cloud-based tool designed to revolutionize the way Stratus Tech operated. The company had grown exponentially, and with that growth came the inevitable challenge of maintaining system stability while scaling efficiently. Michael's idea was simple yet brilliant: a platform that would streamline the company's internal operations, reduce overhead, and provide the flexibility needed for future expansions. It was a vision that not only aligned with Stratus Tech's strategic goals, but also had the potential to position the company as a leader in a highly competitive tech market. The idea had consumed Michael for weeks. He knew that the software would require not just technical innovation, but a deep understanding of the company's current architecture, something only he fully grasped. Every line of code, every feature was crafted with the intention of making the company's operations smoother and more sustainable in the long run. He wasn't doing this for fame or recognition. Michael genuinely believed in the potential of his creation and its ability to solve problems that had been plaguing the company for years. However, Michael understood the stakes. Stratus Tech was moving quickly, and he knew that in this fast-paced environment, ideas were worth less than the speed at which they were executed. There was no time for meticulousness when everyone around him was racing to secure funding, raise profiles, and push out the next big thing. But for Michael, this project wasn't just another task. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, a chance to truly leave his mark on the company. But there was one problem. Michael was well aware of the political landscape at Stratus Tech. The moment he shared his idea, there was a real chance it could be stolen. It wasn't paranoia, he had seen it happen before in the company. Ideas were passed around in meetings, conversations were overheard, and before anyone knew it, someone else would present a polished version of what Michael had spent months developing. So, Michael kept his idea to himself. He shared it only with his trusted confidants, cautiously keeping the details under wraps. He wanted to make sure that when the time came, he would be the one standing at the forefront of the project. That time finally arrived when Michael felt his project was ready to be pitched. With a comprehensive blueprint in hand, he scheduled a meeting with Rebecca Adams, the CEO. He knew that gaining her approval was critical, but he also knew the game well enough to recognize that she wouldn't make a decision based on just the technical merits of the project. Rebecca was a data-driven leader. She needed to see results, metrics, and a clear path to how this new tool would benefit the company's bottom line. Michael meticulously prepared his pitch, ensuring that every question she might ask was anticipated and that the numbers would speak for themselves. But what Michael didn't expect was the subtle shift in the room when Ryan Carter entered the meeting. Ryan, who had been increasingly involved in strategic decisions at Stratus Tech, had begun to overshadow Michael. In many areas, Michael had grown used to Ryan's presence, but now, as Ryan sat across the table, there was an unsettling sense that the tables had turned. Ryan didn't say much during the meeting, but his mere presence made Michael uneasy. He tried to brush it off, focusing on his pitch, which was met with a mix of excitement and curiosity from Rebecca. Rebecca was impressed, asking insightful questions about scalability, long-term impact, and potential challenges. But as soon as Michael wrapped up his pitch, Ryan spoke up. "This is a great idea, Michael," he said with a smile, "but I think we can take it even further. We need to think about not just efficiency, but how we can integrate this tool into the broader market. I have a few ideas about how we can position this as a product offering for our clients as well." Michael's heart sank. Ryan's suggestion was harmless enough on the surface, but Michael couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his stomach. Ryan had just pitched the same ideas Michael had been working on, but now it was framed in a way that gave him the ownership. What had started as a collaborative suggestion in a meeting soon became the focal point of Ryan's strategic vision for the company. Michael could already see the pieces falling into place. Ryan would present this as his own idea, and he would be the one reaping the rewards. Over the next few weeks, Michael watched in silence as Ryan began to push forward with the project. He called meetings with the development team, started sketching out plans for marketing the new tool, and even began making moves to pitch it to the investors. Michael, though not officially excluded from these discussions, found himself slowly but surely becoming an outsider in his own project. His own creation was being stolen before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Ryan's influence grew rapidly as he took charge of the project, presenting it to the board as though it was his own idea. The language he used, the way he framed the product's potential. Everything about Ryan's presentation had Michael's fingerprints all over it, but now it was being presented as Ryan's vision. And as Michael sat in the meetings watching his idea slip further away, he realized that this wasn't just about credit. It was about control. Ryan was positioning himself as the leader of the next big initiative, the one who could bring in revenue, attract attention, and secure promotions. What struck Michael the hardest was not just the theft of his idea, but the sheer audacity of it. Ryan didn't just borrow the idea, he presented it in such a way that he completely overshadowed Michael's contribution. The board, Rebecca, and the rest of the leadership team all saw Ryan as the hero of the story, the one who would drive the company forward with his brilliant vision. Meanwhile, Michael was left in the shadows, silently watching his idea get molded into something he no longer recognized. As the days passed, Michael knew what was coming. Ryan was going to take the credit, and there was nothing Michael could do to stop it. But even as the sting of betrayal settled in, Michael understood that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one where he would take matters into his own hands. Michael Dawson had always been a man of action, but he knew that reacting in haste would be a mistake. The betrayal stung, but his mind was clear. He had been working at Stratus Tech long enough to understand the corporate game. Reacting impulsively would only confirm the narrative that Ryan and others were trying to paint, that Michael was simply an old guard out of touch with the company's new direction. No, Michael knew better. He had built Stratus Tech's infrastructure from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let one ambitious upstart undo everything he had worked for. He took a step back and let the dust settle. For the first time in a long while, Michael allowed himself to think, without the constant pressure of meetings, deadlines, and deliverables. He wasn't just going to sit idly by and watch Ryan take credit for his work. Michael had always been meticulous, and now that attention to detail was about to pay off. The first thing Michael did was document everything. He had always been an advocate for keeping thorough records, something that had become second nature to him over the years. The email exchanges, the code commits, the detailed project notes, every single aspect of his work was captured. Michael made sure to back up every file, every document, and even created multiple copies stored on different devices. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that in order to fight back, he would need hard evidence. Over the next few days, Michael gathered his thoughts and assessed the situation. He knew that a direct confrontation with Ryan would only escalate things and could risk his own standing at Stratus Tech. Instead, he began to think strategically. He wasn't going to confront Ryan head-on. Not yet. Michael's plan was to expose the truth in a way that couldn't be ignored, something that would force the board to take action without being able to dismiss it as sour grapes from a disgruntled employee. Michael had learned the art of timing. He knew that Stratus Tech's quarterly board meeting was fast approaching. The investors were eager to see new growth opportunities, and Ryan's project was positioned as the centerpiece of that growth. Michael realized that this was his moment, the perfect opportunity to leverage the company's own processes against them. But before he could make his move, Michael needed to dig deeper. While going over his notes, he stumbled across something that hadn't crossed his mind: at first, financial irregularities. In the midst of building the software tool, Michael had also been reviewing budget forecasts and tracking costs for the project. As he looked at the numbers again, something didn't add up. Payments to a consulting firm called Quantum Innovations stood out, payments that were unusually large for what seemed like minimal work. Michael decided to investigate further. He found that these payments were tied to a person Ryan knew well, someone from his previous consulting firm. The more Michael dug, the more the pieces fell into place. Quantum Innovations was not just a coincidence. It was a key part of Ryan's scheme. It wasn't just about taking credit for Michael's work. Ryan was using his newfound influence at Stratus Tech to funnel money into this consulting firm, all while masking the company's financials. It was a quiet operation hidden behind the guise of outsourcing, but the numbers were clear. It seemed that Ryan wasn't just interested in taking credit for Michael's idea. He was also lining his own pockets. Now, Michael had not only a personal betrayal to deal with, but also a potential financial scandal. It was a situation that demanded careful planning and calculated execution. Michael wasn't just going to expose Ryan for the idea theft, he was going to make sure the financial discrepancies were part of the conversation as well. With this new information in hand, he began crafting his strategy. First, Michael made sure he had everything documented. The payments to Quantum Innovations, the inflated invoices, and the emails that linked Ryan to the firm were all stored safely. Then he set up an encrypted email account, one that wouldn't be traced back to him. Michael knew that once he made his move, there would be no turning back, and he had to make sure he was untouchable. He spent hours drafting an email to the board of directors. Michael knew that simply accusing Ryan of stealing his idea wouldn't be enough. He needed to frame the conversation in a way that would make it impossible for the board to ignore. He meticulously outlined the financial discrepancies, providing detailed proof of the consulting payments and their direct connection to Ryan's actions. He also included a summary of the software project, explaining how it had been Michael's brainchild from the beginning, and that Ryan's involvement had been minimal at best. But Michael wasn't finished yet. He knew that the board would need more than just accusations. They would need concrete evidence. So he attached a series of documents, financial records, email exchanges, and even a timeline of events showing how Ryan had gradually taken control of the project. He didn't just want to expose Ryan's theft. He wanted to show that this wasn't a simple mistake. It was part of a pattern of misconduct. Michael was playing a long game, and he wasn't going to let Ryan off easy. Before sending the email, Michael took a moment to reflect. He knew that this could cost him his job. The company was riding high on its success, and the last thing the board wanted was a scandal, especially one involving their rising star Ryan. But Michael had made peace with the idea that some things were worth fighting for. His work had been stolen, and the company he had helped build had been exploited. If he didn't act now, everything he had done would be for nothing. At the last moment, he hesitated. He reread the email one more time, ensuring that it was as professional and objective as possible. He didn't want to come off as bitter or vindictive. He wanted the facts to speak for themselves. With one final glance at the subject line, urgent concerns regarding financial irregularities and project ownership, Michael clicked send. The moment the email was out, Michael felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had taken the first step, and there was no turning back now. The wheels of the corporate world were about to turn, and Michael had made sure that they would turn in his favor. He wasn't going to sit back and watch Ryan take everything from him. He had prepared, he had planned, and now he was ready to let the truth come out. Michael Dawson knew that timing was everything. His calculated decision to gather evidence, build his case, and then expose Ryan was not born out of anger or bitterness, but rather from the understanding that this was bigger than personal vengeance. It was about corporate integrity. He had been at Stratus Tech long enough to know that once the wheels of the corporate world started turning, they could not be easily stopped. What he needed now wasn't just to expose Ryan's theft of his idea. It was to force the board to confront the pattern of dishonesty that had been allowed to fester under their noses. The first step in Michael's plan was deceptively simple. He knew that to make a real impact, he would have to bypass Ryan's influence in the company. That meant he needed to go straight to the top. Rebecca Adams, the CEO, had been a driving force in Stratus Tech's growth, and Michael had always respected her for her sharp business acumen. But he also knew that Rebecca had her blind spots, chief among them, her trust in Ryan. She hadn't seen the subtle ways Ryan had manipulated the situation to his advantage. Michael was counting on the fact that Rebecca was intelligent and analytical enough to understand the truth when presented with it. Michael's approach was methodical. He spent the next few days cross-referencing every document, email, and piece of evidence he had gathered. He organized the information into a clean, concise package. He knew that this wasn't the time for a long-winded explanation. He had to present his findings in a way that left no room for ambiguity. He broke everything down into 3 key areas: the intellectual property theft, the financial discrepancies, and Ryan's connections with Quantum Innovations, the consulting firm that had been siphoning money from Stratus Tech. Michael also knew that presenting the information to Rebecca alone wasn't going to be enough. The board had to see the full scope of Ryan's actions and how deeply they had infiltrated Stratus Tech's operations. So he crafted his email, carefully ensuring that it was direct but professional. He avoided inflammatory language or emotional appeals, focusing solely on the facts. Michael's goal wasn't to burn bridges. It was to open the eyes of the board members and force them to reckon with the situation before it spiraled out of control. He hit send on the email, feeling the weight of his decision, but also the clarity of purpose. In his message, he outlined the theft of the cloud-based tool project, explaining how Ryan had gradually taken credit for it, while sidelining Michael's contributions. He included concrete proof emails showing Ryan's gradual involvement in the project, including messages where Michael had initially pitched the idea and later correspondence where Ryan had positioned himself as the leader. The details were irrefutable, but Michael didn't stop there. He attached a second section of the email which detailed the financial irregularities. He pointed to the suspicious payments made to Quantum Innovations, an entity that had been largely under the radar. Michael included invoices, records of payments, and the key piece of evidence, an email chain that directly linked Ryan to the consulting firm. It was clear that Ryan had been using his influence to direct funds toward the company with no real oversight from the board. The numbers were staggering, and Michael made sure the board understood the potential damage to Stratus Tech's reputation and bottom line if they ignored this. Michael's final piece of the puzzle was his closing argument. In the last paragraph of the email, he asked the board to investigate the full extent of Ryan's actions and take immediate steps to address the damage done to both the company's financials and its internal culture. He wasn't asking for immediate action against Ryan. Michael knew that could come later, but he wanted the board to see that this wasn't just a personal grudge. It was a systemic problem that needed to be dealt with. Once the email was sent, Michael sat back in his chair and exhaled. His work wasn't done. Of course, there was still the waiting game, but for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of control. He had laid everything out in front of the people who could make the necessary changes. All he could do now was wait for their response. The next morning, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from his old colleague, Sarah. Sarah had been one of the few people who still respected Michael's technical expertise and had remained neutral when tensions started to rise between him and Ryan. She had heard about the email and wanted to know if Michael was okay. Her message was simple, but the weight of it hit Michael harder than he expected. I heard the boards already talking about it. This could change everything. The minutes stretched into hours, and the anxiety Michael had felt in the past few days began to creep back in. He tried to push it aside and focus on his next steps. There was no turning back now. Around noon, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but Michael recognized the area code. It was from the Stratus Tech headquarters. His heart rate quickened as he answered the call. "Michael, this is Robert Chen." From the board, the voice on the other end of the line said Robert had been on the board of directors for several years and was known for his analytical approach. "We've reviewed your email. I'd like to set up a meeting with you and the rest of the board as soon as possible. Please come to headquarters tomorrow at 9 a.m. We need to discuss this in person." Michael's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected the response to be so swift, but there was no mistaking it. Things were moving forward. The board was taking him seriously. The next 24 hours felt like an eternity. Michael spent the evening reviewing everything once more. He knew he had to be prepared for whatever questions might come his way. He wasn't just walking into that meeting to defend his actions. He was walking into it to expose the truth and make sure the company he had helped build didn't fall victim to Ryan's manipulation. As he walked into the boardroom the next morning, Michael felt a sense of resolve he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't the quiet behind-the-scenes engineer anymore. He was standing up for what was right for the integrity of Stratus Tech and for the work he had done to get the company to where it was. The next morning, Michael walked into the boardroom with a sense of quiet determination. His heart still raced, the weight of what he was about to expose pressing heavily on his chest. But he had no intention of backing down. He had laid out his case meticulously, each detail reinforcing the undeniable truth. This wasn't just about personal betrayal. This was about the integrity of Stratus Tech, the company he had helped build and grow over the years. As he stepped into the room, Michael saw the faces of the board members already gathered, seated around the polished conference table. Robert Chen, the board chair, sat at the head of the table, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a serious expression. Rebecca Adams, the CEO, sat beside him, her eyes meeting Michael's with an unreadable gaze. Ryan wasn't there yet, and Michael couldn't help but wonder if the board had already spoken to him. "Michael," Robert said, motioning for him to sit. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. We've reviewed your email, and it's clear that there are some serious concerns that need to be addressed. Please start from the beginning and walk us through your findings." Michael nodded, his mind focused. He wasn't nervous. He was resolute. He had everything he needed to make his case, and now it was time for the truth to come to light. He began by walking the board through the timeline of events, detailing how the cloud-based software project had initially been his brainchild. He explained the months of hard work he had poured into it, how it was designed to streamline Stratus Tech's operations, and how Ryan had gradually inserted himself into the process. Michael didn't leave anything out. He even provided the board with screenshots of emails showing Ryan's increasingly prominent role in the project, despite his lack of technical involvement. Rebecca's expression remained unreadable as Michael spoke, but he noticed her eyes flicker with unease when he presented the email exchanges that showed how Ryan had taken credit for his work. Michael could feel the tension building in the room. Then he moved on to the financial discrepancies, pulling up the detailed records of payments to Quantum Innovations. He outlined how the consulting firm had been paid for services that seemed inflated or non-existent. Michael could tell that the numbers were hitting home. The board members glanced at each other, visibly concerned. He had suspected there might be some hesitation at first, but seeing the board react like this confirmed his suspicions. The evidence was undeniable. Ryan had been funneling money to this firm, using his influence as a manager, all while presenting himself as the company's golden child. Michael said, his voice steady. "What I'm showing you is not just a simple case of idea theft. It's a case of financial misconduct on a grand scale. Ryan's actions have put Stratus Tech at serious risk." Rebecca finally spoke. "This is a lot to take in, Michael. But Ryan is an asset to the company. He's brought in millions in revenue, and his strategic vision has helped us grow. Are you sure this isn't a misunderstanding?" Her voice was calm, but strained. Michael took a deep breath, keeping his composure. "I understand that Ryan has been an effective speaker and has driven certain initiatives forward, but none of that justifies what he's done behind the scenes. The facts speak for themselves. He's taken credit for my work and manipulated the financials to benefit personally, all at Stratus Tech's expense. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a calculated effort to undermine the integrity of the company. The board members exchanged looks, and for the first time Michael could see that they were starting to grasp the full weight of the situation. He had anticipated Rebecca's hesitation, but now he could tell that the gravity of the financial mismanagement was beginning to sink in. At that moment, the door to the boardroom opened and Ryan stepped in. His confident stride faltered when he saw the room's atmosphere. Michael could see the shock on his face, and for a split second, Ryan seemed to hesitate, but he quickly regained his composure. "Ryan, have a seat," Robert said, his tone unusually sharp. "We need to have a conversation." Ryan sat down, his eyes darting between the board members, clearly sensing the tension in the room. Michael had been prepared for this moment. The moment when Ryan would try to defend himself, spin the narrative, or offer excuses. Ryan began, his voice smooth but slightly strained. "I'm not sure what's going on here, but I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. Yes, I've been working on the project Michael initiated, but we're all part of the same team. I've contributed significantly to the idea's development and have worked tirelessly to bring it to fruition. This is about the future of Stratus Tech, not about one person's credit." Michael couldn't help but notice the disingenuous tone in Ryan's voice. The words sounded rehearsed, as though Ryan had been expecting this confrontation and had already prepared a defense. Michael said, his voice firm. "You've done more than just take credit for my work. You've used your position to funnel money to Quantum Innovations, a firm with ties to you personally. You've manipulated the system for your own gain, and you've done so under the guise of strategic growth. The numbers are there. The emails are there. There's no denying it." Ryan's face tightened, his expression hardening as the realization hit him. Michael had done his homework, and there was no escape. The room was silent for a moment. As the board members processed the information, Michael could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make, and he knew the next few minutes would shape the course of his career and Stratus Tech's future. Finally, Robert spoke. "Ryan, we're going to need to take some time to review everything. Your involvement in these projects is under serious review, and the financial discrepancies you've been linked to will need to be investigated thoroughly." Ryan's demeanor shifted. He stood up, his face reddened with anger. "This is absurd. You can't be serious." "We are serious, Ryan," Rebecca interjected, her voice hardening. "Your actions have put Stratus Tech at risk, and this is no longer a matter of personal development. This is about the future of the company, and right now, that future doesn't look bright with you at the helm." Ryan's expression faltered, and he fell silent. The room seemed to close in around him. His time at Stratus Tech, the golden boy image he had carefully crafted, was crumbling before his eyes. As the meeting drew to a close, Michael couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. He had done what he needed to do. He had exposed the truth, and now Stratus Tech's future was in the hands of those who had the power to make the right choice. The days following the board meeting were a whirlwind for Michael Dawson. Stratus Tech had quickly launched a full investigation into Ryan's actions, and the board members, now fully aware of the financial mismanagement and intellectual property theft, acted decisively. Ryan was placed on administrative leave pending further legal and financial scrutiny, while Stratus Tech's PR team scrambled to manage the fallout. The media had already begun picking up on the story, and Michael knew that the company's reputation was at risk. But despite the chaos swirling around him, Michael couldn't shake the feeling of relief. The weight that had pressed on his chest for weeks, no months, was finally lifting. He had done the right thing, exposed the truth, and now it was time to move on. Michael had never sought recognition, but the burden of carrying the company's integrity had become too much. Standing up for what was right had taken its toll, but it had also made him realize something important. The time had come for a new chapter in his life. Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself fielding calls from various headhunters and tech companies, eager to get him on board. The offers were tempting, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider the possibilities. But Michael was no longer driven by the need to prove himself to anyone, not even to himself. He didn't want to be just another cog in the machine. He wanted something more, a place where his skills and expertise would be valued, where he could lead in a way that aligned with his vision of integrity and innovation. One offer in particular stood out, a smaller innovative startup called Arcadia. Technologies had reached out to him. They were a young company, but their leadership team was filled with people who valued technical depth over flashy business strategies. The CEO, Emma Westbrook, had a reputation for being a disruptor in the industry, but she wasn't interested in cutting corners. Arcadia was looking for someone who could bring stability and vision to their growing product development team, and Michael's experience seemed like the perfect fit. When Michael spoke with Emma, he immediately knew there was something different about her approach. She wasn't asking him to jump into a leadership role right away. Instead, she wanted him to be part of something bigger to help guide the company in a way that would make a real impact on the industry. She didn't promise immediate results or lofty bonuses. Instead, she focused on building a solid foundation for growth. The honesty and clarity in her approach were refreshing, and Michael found himself genuinely excited about the possibility of contributing to something he believed in. After careful thought, Michael accepted the offer from Arcadia. It was a risk, of course. Arcadia wasn't the household name that Stratus Tech had been, and there were no guarantees in the fast-moving tech world. But Michael was tired of the corporate games, the constant jockeying for position, and the endless cycle of innovation for the sake of growth. He wanted to work in an environment that didn't prioritize profits at the expense of integrity. Arcadia was small enough that his contributions could make a significant impact, but big enough to challenge him in new ways. As he packed up his office at Stratus Tech, Michael felt a sense of closure. He wasn't leaving with bitterness or regret. He was leaving with pride. He had given everything to Stratus Tech, and while the company had been shaken by the scandal, he knew he had played a key role in steering it back toward accountability. The decision to move on wasn't about running away from the past. It was about embracing the future. When Michael walked into Arcadia's offices for the first time, he was struck by the energy of the place. It was a far cry from the polished corporate halls of Stratus Tech, but that was exactly what he needed. There was a tangible sense of creativity in the air. People weren't just talking about innovation, they were living it. The culture at Arcadia was collaborative, open, and above all, honest. Michael found himself excited about the work ahead. Over the next few months, Michael settled into his new role as Chief Technology Officer. It wasn't a position he had ever expected, but it felt right. He worked closely with the product development team, refining the company's technology stack and creating systems that could scale with their rapidly growing client base. He wasn't the sole architect of the company's products, but he was instrumental in shaping the vision. More than that, he was able to mentor young engineers and help them find their own paths, just as he had done when he first started his career. Arcadia was everything Michael had been searching for, a company where integrity was more than just a buzzword, where technical excellence was celebrated, and where his experience could truly make a difference. As the company grew, Michael found that his role continued to evolve. He wasn't just leading the technology division, he was helping shape the company's overall strategy, making decisions that would set the tone for years to come. In many ways, Michael felt like he had come full circle. The struggles he had faced at Stratus Tech, the betrayal, and the subsequent fallout had forced him to reassess his values and his priorities. Now, as he looked around the open collaborative space at Arcadia, he realized that he had found the right environment to thrive. One where his work was valued, his integrity was respected, and his ideas were heard. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the months went by, Michael found a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He wasn't constantly fighting battles in the corporate trenches or worried about who was taking credit for his work. Instead, he was focused on building something meaningful, on leading with a sense of purpose and integrity that had become his guiding principle. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Michael was excited about what the future held. Looking back, Michael Dawson couldn't help but reflect on the series of events that had led him to where he was now. From his years of quiet dedication at Stratus Tech, to the betrayal that had rocked him to his core, and finally to the new beginning at Arcadia Technologies. Michael had been through more than most people would ever face in their careers. Yet, as he sat at his desk in Arcadia's open office space, he realized that everything he had endured had shaped him into the leader he was today. One of the most important lessons Michael had learned through this journey was the value of integrity, not just in the work you do, but in the way you navigate the world around you. At Stratus Tech, he had been dedicated to his work, pouring years of effort into building systems that helped the company grow. But somewhere along the way, the company had lost its way. The pressures of rapid growth, the corporate games, and the rise of ambitious individuals like Ryan had pushed integrity to the sidelines. Michael had been an outsider in that world, someone who valued results but who also believed that the path to success should be grounded in trust, transparency, and honesty. When those values were compromised, it was no longer the company he had once believed in. What had been a painful betrayal was ultimately a wake-up call. Michael had spent too much of his career waiting for recognition, hoping that the value of his work would speak for itself. But the truth was, no one would value your integrity if you didn't first demand that it be respected. The betrayal he had experienced wasn't just about Ryan stealing credit for his idea. It was about a culture that prioritized short-term success over long-term values. Michael's decision to expose the truth had been driven by a need to restore the company's integrity, but it had also been a turning point for him personally. He realized that he couldn't afford to stay in a place where his values were not aligned with the direction the company was heading. But the lessons didn't end there. Michael had also learned the importance of resilience. Throughout the entire ordeal, from the slow creeping feeling of being sidelined to the shocking realization of being betrayed, Michael never gave up. He had been tempted to walk away from the fight, to let Ryan take credit and move on. But something deep inside him knew that if he let the injustice slide, he would regret it forever. He had built the systems that kept Stratus Tech running, and he wasn't going to let someone else claim ownership of his hard work. His decision to take action was about more than just seeking justice. It was about preserving his own sense of self-respect. In the end, that resilience was what allowed him to walk away from Stratus Tech, not with bitterness, but with a sense of closure. Michael had also discovered that success isn't just about technical expertise or business acumen. It's about the people you work with. The culture at Arcadia Technologies was night and day from what he had experienced at Stratus Tech. The leadership there valued collaboration over competition, integrity over shortcuts, and people over profits. At Arcadia, Michael was not just another cog in the machine. He was a leader trusted to shape the company's future in a way that reflected his values. The culture at Arcadia was one of respect, and it was clear to Michael that when you put people first, the rest follows naturally. One of the most rewarding aspects of his new role was the opportunity to mentor the next generation of engineers. At Stratus Tech, Michael had always felt isolated, his expertise taken for granted. But at Arcadia, he was able to share his knowledge, help others grow, and see them flourish in ways he had never imagined. It was an experience he had never had before, and it reminded him that true success wasn't about personal glory. It was about lifting others up and helping them reach their full potential. The satisfaction he derived from seeing his team members succeed from watching them push the boundaries of innovation was unlike any professional accomplishment he had experienced. Michael's story had come full circle, from being an unsung hero at Stratus Tech to confronting betrayal and corruption, to ultimately finding a place where he could truly thrive. He realized that the lessons he had learned were invaluable. They weren't just lessons about the corporate world or business strategies, they were lessons about life. Integrity, resilience, and a commitment to fostering a positive environment were the cornerstones of any lasting success, whether personal or professional. Looking ahead, Michael knew that there would always be challenges. The tech industry was fast-paced, and there would always be those who cut corners to get ahead. But he had learned that success built on integrity was the only kind of success that truly mattered. In the end, Michael wasn't just proud of what he had accomplished in his career. He was proud of how he had done it. He had remained true to his principles even when it had cost him. And in the end, those principles had made him stronger, wiser, and more confident in his ability to shape the future. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed to be easy, but Michael was ready for whatever came next. He had found his place not just in a company, but in a community of people who shared his values. And that was all he needed to move forward, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was prepared to face them with integrity and purpose.